Why is the Deep South so different? Like, I've not been to the Deep South yet. Would love to someday. Like, would love to go to Alabama, Virginia, like all of those like Deep South areas, Deep South states, just to see if it's like I've seen it, displayed on like TV and in movies. Because when you compare the Deep South, or at least how it's shown on TV, like in a TV show called like Ozarks, the Netflix show Ozarks, when you compare that to New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago or Boston, it just seems so different. Like it just like the way they dress, talk, eat, everything just seems so different. Why is that?
Why is the South so much different than the rest of the United States? Every region and sub-region in the US has cultural differences and quirks that might be considered odd in other regions. The poster child for this, of course, is the Deep South: Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Other southern states have some of the same differences, they just have a little bit more in the Deep South. We ran a survey and asked what region—
Wow, is this the Deep South? If you just showed me this, I would have thought this was San Francisco or California.
is the most unique when you compare it to the other regions in the US. The South won by a landslide. In this video, we're going to explore what those differences are. Some of you will see some of these things in other regions, but they're probably not as big a deal as it is in the South, in the Deep South. When I was in college, I did a few papers on this subject, and I was heavy into cultural geography. After World War II and US presidents, the cultural differences between the regions in the United States is what I've spent a majority of my time reading about over the years. I find this fascinating. Always have. So in this video, we're gonna take a look and find out why the Deep South is f***ing weird compared to the rest of the country. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look.
By the way, any of you guys watching this, before we watch this together, why do you think the Deep South is so different to the rest of the US? I'm trying to think, like, why? What do you think? I don't know.
The history. The southern United States is a region that has interested both its own people and outsiders for a very long time. Its rich mix of culture, history, and values make it different from the rest of the country. One of the main reasons the South is so unique, its history, especially the times when there was slavery and eventually the Civil War. Before the Civil War, the southern states depended on growing crops like cotton on giant farms, and they used enslaved people to do the work. Big
plantations, right? Yeah, I think that's what they were called.
Farms and plantations were the main source of revenue for the Deep South, and it was very profitable. I mean, when you don't have to pay your labor, anything's profitable, I guess. Even though slavery ended in the United States over 150 years ago, its effects are still seen on how different races interact and the Southern way of life.
Interesting.
The Civil War. The Civil War, which for—
Yeah, I mean, the slavery one is definitely probably a big one, right? Because I imagine a lot of the freed slaves settled in the South, and the memory of what it must have been like has probably gone down and formed part of the culture in that area.
For the most part was about slavery and state rights. Some people argue it's just about state rights. Well, okay, but you were enslaving human beings. A lot of people will argue that it was about state rights. It wasn't about slavery. No, they were trying to end slavery in the United States, which is 100% wrong, no matter how you explain it, so you don't have a right to do it. These days, not everyone sees things that way in the South, and I get that. But some do, and most of the United States finds that very strange. But back during the Civil War, it made Southerners feel proud that they were standing up for their state rights, at least how they saw it. A lot of that pride is still a thing in the southern states. Even today, things like the Confederate flag and statues of Confederate leaders bring up mixed feelings across the country, but they mean a lot to the people in the South. This history has shaped a strong sense of independence and a desire to keep Southern traditions alive. And when you know the backstory to that, as you meet a lot of Southern people, you could see where it's coming from now. You could tell that they have this big thing about independence and pride in their state or their region. The only place you'll find independence like that in the United States that's as strong as it is here are the western states where it was kind of frontierish, like Wyoming, Montana, and Nevada. Could probably throw Idaho in there too, but I don't think it's as strong there.
How common is it to see a Confederate flag being flown in the Deep South? I'm trying to think of a specific area, like Alabama. I know Alabama's a whole state. Like an average sort of town in Alabama, how frequently would you see the Confederate flag? Would you see it every day? Like once a week, maybe once a month?
The Southern drawl. Every region has their accent. Outside of Boston, there's probably no other accent that is as obvious and unique than the South. The Southern United States has a handful of different dialects, with the Deep South having two, really. The main one being Southern United States English. That's what they call it. You also have Cajun. There could be an argument, too, that New Orleans has their own. You also have Texas English.
I thought Cajun and New Orleans, the accent was pretty much one and the same. I didn't think they were two separate, distinct accents.
Appalachian English, Black Southern English. But what we're focusing on this one is the Southern drawl. This is a type of accent that has developed over hundreds of years, just like any accent does. But the foundation of the Southern drawl was set back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. The beginnings of this accent goes all the way back to around the mid 1700s, when wealthy British traders started to speak without the R sound in their words to show that they were from a higher social class. And you can hear that in Boston. It's a little watered down these days. I mean, the Boston accent isn't as thick as it once was. But, you know, they say, like the old jokes, "pock the ca." There's no R. They kind of replaced the R with an...
Sounds a bit like English, like as in like a British park the car. I suppose an American might say park the car. Like there'd be a stronger emphasis on the R part, I guess. I just did a terrible accent there. Sorry, guys.
H. Instead of saying park the car, they say park the car. I'm horrible at accents, but you know what I'm talking about. Now, down in the South about the same time, things were a bit different. People from northern England who were not as rich and settled in the South, they continued to say the R sound. This is where the Southern drawl began. It was almost like a distinction between the common man and the rich people. The rich people used it to show status, and the poor people, in some cases, exaggerated it to show the distinction between the two. Now, it is important to note that there are different accents in the South that have a similar accent, but they don't say the R's.
Wow, look at this place. This place is gorgeous. What kind of tree is this with the drooping things we see here?
There's a few other tweaks to it, and there's some sayings, and there's some words that are used there that aren't used other places. Words like fixin', which is fixing, yonder, like over yonder. Doohickey is one too. Now, a lot of people use that all over the country, but that originates in the South. Doohickey. Give me some sugar, like give me a kiss or a hug or whatever, or some sort of affection. Yeah. That's a Southern saying. Also,
what does doohickey mean? What does it mean?
The one I've always liked, and I actually used, picked it up from my family that's from the South, is carry me. Like, carry me to the store, carry me home. It's not literally carrying you, it's like, give me a ride. And then, of course, outside the Deep South, you have, like, Texas with y'all. Quit being ugly, that's a Southern saying, meaning quit being a pain in the butt. One of the absolute best things is when they use bless your heart. Now, I talked about this in other videos, that bless your heart is a nice thing to say to someone. Oh, bless your heart, you know. That's very common for Southerns to say, but they don't just use it as a sign of affection. They also use it as a little backhanded thing when they think you're dumb.
Oh, really? Oh my day. I've had quite a few bless your heart comments. Wow, so you guys weren't being nice? Oh my God. I mean, you probably were. Like, because he said that most of the time it's meant as a nice way of saying, you know, a thing, but... Okay, so some people that were saying it to me were like backhanded sort of compliment.
I was like, oh, bless his heart. He's too dumb to figure it out, but at least he's trying. That's what they kind of mean when they say bless your heart sometimes. It's one of those phrases that has many different uses. Sort of like the word dude in California, or the F word in New Jersey and New York. Also in the South, you have things like, say, a Coke. I'm going to get a Coke. To Southerners, this could be any carbonated drink. It doesn't have to be a Coke. You could have in your mind, you're going to get a 7-Up, but you're going to say, I'm going to go get a Coke. Plum is another good one.
Oh.
She's plumb tired out. She was plumb crazy. Means totally or absolutely. I had a conversation about this with a British guy that used to work for my brother years ago. And I was explaining that the South, sometimes you can't understand
that cameraman. He knew what he was doing there.
What they're talking about if you're from other parts of the country. He said they have that in England too. It's called Manchester. The economics. Economically...
What does doohickey mean? What does it mean? Doohickey. I'm trying to think what it could mean. Doohickey. A hickey's like a love bite, isn't it? Is it a love bite?
The South's focus on farming played a big role in making it unique. Unlike the more industrialized North, the South's economy was based on crops and farming. This created a different way of sharing money and a social system where there were clear differences between landowners, farm workers, and enslaved people back in the day. This economic gap and the reliance on farming have influenced how the South does politics and how people act, setting it apart from the more industrial North. Obviously, the South is changing now. You've got Atlanta is a pretty serious tech spot with movies being made there all the time now. Florida has some things going on. It's a lot different than it used to be, but a lot of that carries over.
Is Atlanta like a cool place to visit? I've heard quite a lot about, not a lot about it, but a lot of people are from Atlanta. A lot of like artists, rappers. I think Tyler Perry's built like a massive TV studio there. Where's Atlanta? Georgia. Is it close to Texas? Maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to picture it. Because Texas is like down there. Georgia's probably like up.
Becomes part of their culture. People from outside the South see it, they think it's kind of strange. The South has a history of a simpler life. A lot of that has to do with that farming type lifestyle, where you work the land. That's how this region of the United States started out, and that's how they became what they are today. So sure, things have changed, but that mentality and culture will stick with them forever. Religion. Religion and a strong sense of being conservative have also helped make the southern states a little bit different. For a long time, the South has been known for its strong belief in evangelical Christianity, which really affects their lifestyle, like politics, values, and families. This has made the South more traditional and conservative on social matters, which is unlike the more open and diverse views of other parts of the country. Obviously, not everyone in the South is into religion, but more than any other part of the country, the percentages are higher here.
Yeah, like, isn't there a region called the Bible Belt? I think that's like is it a combination like of the states, southern states, like that make up the most religious states, I think? Is that a sort of correct description of the Bible Belt?
Especially in the Deep South. I mean, the Deep South is in the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt encompasses all the southern states, except for the southern tip of Texas and the southern tip of Florida, where all those immoral people are in Miami. So a lot of people from different parts of the country might find their devotion, or at least the amount of people that are into Christianity, a little odd compared to where they're from. I mean, not saying other states don't have religion. They're just a little, I don't want to say feverish about it. They're just a little more into it than other parts of the country, and it's obvious.
Interesting. Like, is the South, the Deep South, still as religious as it was, say, 50 years ago? Because over here, it does seem like younger people are leaving religion. There's not as many, like, churches are closing down. Churches are struggling to find, pastors and priests and stuff like that. Is that also happening in the South? And is it happening in America in general?
The Southern culture. The Southern culture is full of interesting things like food, music. The Southern culture has become famous all over the world, and that's how most people know about the South. It's through the music, through the food. These things have played a big role in keeping the Southern traditions alive and strong, making the region even more unique compared to the rest of the country. Many, many years ago, when the Berlin Wall came down and people started crossing it was all over the news. This teenage guy, he might have been 20 or something, came across the border and they were interviewing people and they're all, how does this feel? He's all, it's great. I'm going to go to America. That's what first thing he said. They're all, why do you want to go to America? He barbecues, Leonard Skinner, jeans. I was just like, oh my God, this guy wants to make it to America.
Jeans? Didn't they have jeans in Germany?
So he could see Leonard Skinner. I don't even know if they were performing back then, but still. I was like, Leonard Skinner, the guy just comes from a communist country, gets a little freedom. He's like, I'm going to see Leonard Skinner. And in case you don't know, Leonard Skinner is probably one of the most successful bands to ever come out of Alabama. That band was like the founding fathers of Southern rock. In my personal opinion, I think the music, more than anything else, has played a big part in letting the South be known outside the United States and North America. Think all the way back to B.B. King, Elvis, the Marshall Tucker Band, Charlie Daniels Band from back in the day, John Lee Hooker, Wilson Pickett, Howlin' Wolf, and even the Allman Brothers from Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah, the music is a big one, a big one. I think the blues came from the South, didn't it? Like the entire sort of genre of the blues originated, I think, in the South. R&B, I think, rhythm and blues, jazz maybe as well.
The politics. In terms of politics, the South has usually leaned more towards conservative beliefs compared to other places in the country. The South, especially the Deep South, is considered very red, very Republican. It's like they could always count on winning the southern states, especially the Deep South. Last couple elections, Georgia's been looking a little iffy, but the rest of the southern states are solid red states. It's like every election, you know they're going to win those, and you know the Democrats are going to win California and New York. The southern states have been supporting conservative Republicans for decades. They just seem to fit the political views and the priorities that the southern states want, for the most part. Whenever I say something like that, you always get a bunch of people going, well, I voted for the Democrats and I live in Mississippi. Whenever we talk about states, we're talking about averages.
So this is like a breakdown of like how the states typically vote. Interesting. It's interesting how the Republicans sort of dominate the interior of the US, whereas like the coasts kind of go to the Democrats. Quite an interesting little thing there. I wonder why that is.
Everyone's different. You're always going to have some outliers. But for the most part, the South is very red. This is another strange thing that you'll find in the South and not as much in other parts of the country. People openly talk politics and they complain about politics to complete strangers, just like it's normal small talk. Some parts of the country you'll go, how about this day? Yeah, this weather's killing me. I can't stop sweating. That's how a lot of conversations happen with people you don't know in public in most of the country. In the South, it's not terribly unusual to have a conversation with a complete stranger and they start off with these damn politicians. Country's going to hell in a handbasket, that type stuff. I've had a few people bring that up in the comment section when we've done things on southern states or southern cities. They'll say something like they moved to a southern state after living in Nevada most of their life, and they are surprised how openly aggressive these people are about politics and how casually they just discuss it. Most of the time, people try and avoid politics with total strangers. Not in the South. Years ago, I saw a YouTube video where the guy's interviewing people, southern people, they were living in a trailer, and this guy just starts going off about these damn politicians, giving handouts to everyone, and no one wants to work, and he's on a rant, and all of a sudden this woman's voice from inside was like, Charlie, what are you talking about? You've been on disability and Social Security for 10 years. He's all, but I need that. The way the cameraman pulled the camera away from him was just, it spoke volumes.
How common is it for people to live in trailers? Like, the trailer that we just saw here, like this one, in the South. Is it quite a common thing or is it quite rare?
Charlie, what are you talking about? You've been on disability and Social Security for 10 years. He's all, but I need that. The way the cameraman pulled the camera away from him was just, it spoke volumes. He was just like, oh God. But politics are definitely a big difference in the South compared to other parts of the country. Sure, you have places in the Midwest that are Republican states, but they don't get into it as much as they do in the South,
right.
Especially the Deep South. And I think a lot of that has to do with their distrust of the government. No other part of this country hates the government like the southern states do.
Really?
And that feeling can be traced back to the Civil War and beyond.
I do wish that we could go back to when we could talk about politics and other sensitive, quote unquote, topics freely, like salary and things like that. I feel like, why do we have to now be so guarded and, protective of our, political or whatever views? It's just sad that you can't just have a random conversation with someone, you disagree with someone about something, and, maybe you talk about it and come to some kind of compromise, or you just agree to disagree and it doesn't end up in some massive argument. Doesn't it feel like it would be better if we could do that?
So, in conclusion, the southern United States stands out because of its mix of history, economy, society, and politics. Slavery and the Civil War, the focus on farming, strong religious beliefs, and conservative values have all made the South have its own identity. Even as the country has changed over time, the South has held on to a lot of its traditions and ways of life, making it a region that is special and interesting in the big picture of the United States.
I really want to visit the South. Like I spoke about at the start, I think really getting there, going there, seeing it, like that would give me the most exposure like to it. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but do you know what I mean? Like, I think really going somewhere super rural or just a southern city, because even a city like Atlanta, I guess, would be different to being somewhere like New York, because the southern flair and twang and just way of doing things will be reflected in that city. So yeah, I really, really want to visit the South. Like, give me some recommendations as to southern cities to go to have a good time. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.